And even those little villages, when it's set in little heartbeat-style villages, are still a version of urbanity, really, you know. They are, but they're just a microcosm of it.
So you have Ken Brune writing about Galway, and you have Declan Hughes, who has an Irishman who has come back, in fact, from Los Angeles,
Sure.
and he's in Dublin. And I found it completely fascinating. And there's the priest, Brother Andrew Nugent, I think it is, who's written a couple of books, one of them actually about African immigrants in Dublin, which I found to be...
And yet, curiously, Irish people don't read crime fiction set in Ireland to the degree that Americans will read Irish crime fiction. We haven't accommodated ourselves to seeing our society viewed in that way.
That's fascinating. You know, I had meant to talk to you about short stories, at which you've done brilliantly, and you have a collection called Nocturnes over here, but obviously you're a person afizzle with ideas, and short stories sort of demand nifty but relatively pointed ideas, don't they?
They do, but that's part of the pleasure in them, and I think I'm a bit sorry that people don't read more short stories, because I think people approach them expecting the same thing you get from a novel, and you don't. Short stories don't have beginning, middles, and ends. Short stories offer you a snapshot of something, and then usually leave the reader to speculate on what happened afterwards. And that's why I think there are short stories that have resonated with me more than novels, and probably more of them in a strange way, because they've stayed with me. A short story like Tobias Wolff's Hunters in the Snow, or Arben Shaw's The Girls in Their Summer Dresses, these marvelous moments, and then you're left teetering on the brink of something, and I've always been fascinated by that, and Nocturnes was, a lot of the stories were about that, were about giving people a glimpse of something. And you mentioned M.R. James earlier. M.R. James was the other great influence on me, again because he showed kind of, you get a flash of something in the dark, that's all you get, not an explanation, just a flash of it, and that idea that the world is infinitely stranger and more, your grasp upon reality is much more tenuous than you thought it was. And that feeds into crime fiction as well. And it's probably why I'm not uncomfortable with having elements of the supernatural alongside elements of the crime novel, because they're both about that fear, that suspicion that we have that our world is a lot less secure than it seems to be. The thread in the ghost story is supernatural, is not human in nature. The thread in the crime novel largely is, but they come from the same fear, I think.
Well, you do that very well. Which is the book that has we start out in the cathedral and there's all that wonderful stuff? Not this one. Is it about 2 books back where we...
Oh, the Black Angel.
Yeah. I mean, that's so evocative. I mean, I've said they're American, but actually you move around a lot.
Well, that one, because I was interested in European history, and I'm planning a novel which would be set in medieval England. I'm curious about that period in history, but I'd found a fascinating church that had been furnished with human bones, and when you see something like that, it's a gift. You kind of think, well, that'll save me making it up, you know, because it's there, and I'll just steal it. Thanks very much. As Oscar Wilde again, talent borrows, but genius steals.
Well, you've done an historical, but again, you're in American territory. The Bad Men was, in fact, a book in which you were able to go back to a terrible crime of some centuries ago.
Yeah, and again, that was based on real aspects of Maine history. When I was talking earlier about how Maine has offered me, when I come up with something in my imagination, there's something in Maine that usually echoes it. I had wanted to set a novel in a small isolated community, which was going to be an island off the coast of Maine. And then I found that actually in Maine, the process of immigration, of colonization, was reversed at one point, because the natives in Maine didn't want people on the coastline at all, to the extent that people in Maine fled the coast and began fortifying islands. So the islands of Casco Bay became fortified islands, because the Indians could only get so far in a bark canoe. And if you got far enough away from them, they wouldn't be able to attack you. And I thought that was quite fascinating. And then it turned out that it was almost like that echo continued through Maine history, because in the Second World War, Peaks Island, which is where the book is set, although it's renamed, was fortified to protect the Casco Bay from attack by the Japanese or the Germans. It was a deep water port. So they put 2 huge guns on it and fortified the island again. They did exactly what people had done about 200 years before. And I loved that little echo, history repeating itself in a really strange way. But I did also love the fact that they only ever fired the guns once as a test. And they broke every window on Peaks Island. These are not people whose windows you want to be breaking casually. And I think they turned up on the doorstep and said, Japanese better be on the doorstep the next time you fire those guns. The guns were never fired again and were eventually disassembled. But Peaks Island remained a hollow fortified island covered in watchtowers. And it was... There are writers who will research from the internet, and you can get an awful lot from the internet, and most readers are never going to know the difference. I've always been very keen on going out and taking the time to go and explore, because had I not done that, I would never have found Peaks Island, or I would never have found the other little places that crop up in the book. And I think give it some of the, I think readers spot it. Readers, even if you don't know that it's true, you think, that seems true. And that's the trick of fiction, I think, to make people forget for a time that they're inhabiting a created world.
One of the things I always loved the best about talking to you, and I've been talking to you for a really long time in an awful lot of places. I was thinking about you and Karen Slaughter and how hilarious you were in some side room in London at a book fair. We haven't even, I can't be funny, so you and Karen are
you can be funny.
Well,
you're doing yourself an injustice.
You and Karen are hilarious. But one of the things that I always think of, there are two things that I always react to when I'm with you. One of which is I can look at you and I can almost see multiple books lining up behind your eyes. You know, I really can. I can see there's all these books in there, and I just hope you have time to get as many of them out as is possible. But the other thing I think that is just incredibly contagious about you, and which I love, is how much you love what you do. You really love it.
I'm very fortunate to be doing something that had I been asked as a child, what would you like to do? Apart from a brief period of wanting to be a vet, having read too many James Herriot novels, I would have said I'd love to be able to write, and to be able to support myself by writing.
But that's your gift, I think, is that you are such a communicator, and you are so doing what you love that it makes us love you. And unfortunately, we have now run out of time, because I could do this for another hour.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much,
As always,
Barbara.
Mr. Connolly, it's been a delight, and thank you all very much for joining us today.